Hydrolysed protein diets for pets who are allergic to food are admittedly expensive. There are alternatives out there, but you need to understand a little bit about protein and how allergies work in order to make a good choice. My name is Dr. Ferox, and I'm a general practice veterinarian who is currently up to her eyeballs in pets with allergies because it's summer in Australia and this is where I work. Now, if your pet is unlucky enough to have a food allergy, and probably maybe 1 in 5 of pets with an allergy symptom will have a food allergy component at the upper end, and it might be sort of 1%, 2% of the whole pet population, depending on which studies you read. It's almost always to a protein, and chicken and beef are the most common allergens for pets. That is because chicken and beef are the most commonly fed protein sources to pets. Food allergies are almost always to a protein. Grain allergies are actually really uncommon, despite what most of the internet would like you to think. I can ramble about that in a different point. I should point out that when I say protein, I do mean any sort of protein. There is a tendency from human nutrition aimed at lay people to talk about proteins as being chicken breasts, beef mince, or eggs, or just a whole food, and calling that whole thing protein. But that's not strictly accurate, because beef mince, for example, is a lot of protein, but it's also fat, and you will still have some carbs in any meat source. When they mean meat, they just say protein. And likewise, if they say carbohydrates, they might mean whole potatoes or corn or bread. But even things like pasta has a decent amount of protein in it because it's often made with eggs. So if I say carbohydrate, I mean carbohydrate, not a whole food. If I say protein, I mean a protein, not necessarily a whole food. And we do have to talk a lot about protein because this is what allergies are focused on. Sorry, it's going to get all biochemical for a minute. So what is a protein? On a molecular level, a protein is a long string of amino acids that gets twisted and folded, modified, and built into a 3D shape that serves a function. And there's all sorts of protein. What they are exactly doesn't matter. What I want you to remember is that they have a shape. It's a very specific shape. And that will get changed by digestion or cooking or just other biological processes. Now, allergies develop as an immune response. Most pets are not going to be born with them, but they develop them over time. So it's quite possible for a dog to develop a, for example, chicken allergy after many, many years of being fed chicken. It's not really anything special about the chicken, it's just that it's readily available. There is some theories that if you feed a protein to an animal with an inflamed gut, it's more likely to develop an allergy to that protein. But it's not really relevant enough for me to inform your dietary choices that way. Admittedly, we do feed a lot of chicken to dogs and cats when they're sick, but we feed a lot of chicken anyway, so I don't know how truly significant that is. Now, when you have an immune response, you have antibodies, which are usually seen as these little Y-shaped molecules. And at the ends of the Y, they have essentially a lock and key mechanism. So the ends of the Y are always specific to a molecule. In this case, our protein, our purple protein. So it will fit onto the protein pretty much perfectly, and then these ends activate an immune response. And that causes all the itch and the allergy symptoms that drive everybody nuts. Now, some proteins are conserved across species. So a chicken will have very unique proteins for a chicken, but some of them will also be the same in a turkey. The proteins in beef are nearly identical to veal, so do not use veal as a novel protein diet if you think your dog has a beef allergy. That will not work. But same with things like buffalo. Buffalo is pretty close to beef. It is possible to be allergic to beef, but not buffalo. but it's also quite possible to be allergic to both. If you have a suspect for the food allergy, pick something really different. And there's whole phylogeny trees you can dive into if you want to think about from an evolutionary perspective which species are more similar to each other. They're quite detailed, but for example, cattle are relatively similar to sheep, but less similar to horses and to pigs. They're very unsimilar to chicken and ducks, which are more similar to each other. And then you can have something way out there, like crocodile or like insect protein. So if you are feeding a hydrolysed protein diet, the reason they're so expensive is that they take the protein molecule of choice and they hydrolyze it, which means they are breaking it up into different tiny shapes. And the more expensive they are, often the more processing they've done to reduce the molecular weight of the protein so that the immune system doesn't really recognize it anymore. It doesn't have a single molecule that it can bind to and activate. So in theory, you should have no immune response. Now, your alternative to a hydrolyzed protein diet is to feed something entirely different. Because in this case, the circle protein is not going to activate the antibodies to the star shape. It is a little bit more complicated than that because proteins are not just flat shapes. They are actually three-dimensional complicated shapes with active sites and inactive sites and structural bits, and you can have antibodies to any part of this. So what counts as a novel protein? If a hydrolyzed protein is a big molecule that has been broken up into tiny, tiny little pieces so that the shapes are different, a novel protein is something that your pet, the individual, has never eaten before. If your pet has signs of food allergy, like itchy skin mostly, or reoccurring ear infections, or sometimes gastrointestinal symptoms, if it has never ever eaten, for example, crocodile, it's not a crocodile allergy causing the problem. So a novel protein is something that your pet has never encountered because it can't be allergic to the thing it's never seen. Now, if you're in America, you might think kangaroo would be a novel protein. Who on earth feeds kangaroo? But for me in Australia, I can't really use kangaroo because it's everywhere. Lots of cats and dogs have eaten kangaroo. Crocodile is usually a good choice. Things like pig, pork, boar, whatever you want to call it, you do have to be a little bit careful of. You need to actually look at the ingredient label for what you were feeding because a lot of foods will already have been feeding pork liver, so that does not count as a novel protein anymore. It might be worth looking at my previous video on an introduction to dog and cat nutrition if you're not sure about how to read labels, and then come back to this one because I like the company. There are supposedly blood tests to diagnose food allergy, but as a clinician, I find them rather difficult to use because they don't say, yes, your pet is allergic to egg, chicken, peas, fish. It says your pet has high levels of antibodies to chicken, beef, tuna, and that doesn't necessarily correlate. Just because there's high levels of antibodies, it does not mean there's a high level of reaction once that pet eats that thing. It might just be exposed to those things very often. So it's not a definite way of diagnosing a food allergy. It might increase our suspicion, but it's not a diagnosis. To get a diagnosis, you need to test feed. What it could be useful for is picking a novel protein, because if you have a list of 10 different proteins and your pet has high levels of antibody to 6 of them, well, they're a little bit more suspicious than the ones that have low levels of antibody. So if you're picking a novel protein, pick one with a low antibody count. So which diets do I recommend for figuring out or managing a food allergy? Now, please do not call me a sellout because I do need to talk about Hills and Royal Canin for several minutes, but then I'll talk about some alternatives. Fair? The first one is actually Royal Canin's Anallergenic, which does have some slightly unfortunate spelling, but at least it's memorable. It's an extremely hydrolysed protein diet. So all the protein molecules are broken up or processed too small for the immune system to react to. And it seems to pick up about 99.6% of food allergies. Sorry, forgot to mention, the protein in anallergenic is made from chicken feathers. It's chicken feather hydrolysed. And this works because most animals that are allergic to chicken are not actually allergic to chicken feathers, they're allergic to chicken flesh. And secondly, it's been treated in a bunch of different ways, mostly with acid, to break those molecules down so small that it's not really recognizable as chicken anymore. This sounds weird, but it's actually not new. Some places do this to make infant formula, so milk for babies that are deathly allergic to cow's milk. And it works, at least long enough to get them onto solids. You would wonder if there's any side effects from having such a weird protein source, but it's actually really well tolerated. You do technically get some shrinkage of the intestinal villi because the protein molecules are tiny. You don't need as much intestinal surface to absorb it. So if you're coming off it, you do want to wean slowly back onto the new food to give that gut time to adjust. But otherwise, it works really well. The next tier town, I have the Science Diet ZD and the Royal Canin hypoallergenic, which are somewhere probably 96 to 99% effective at picking them up. Now, if you need to do a 12-week food trial with your pet, I'd pick the anallergenic and then maybe step down if you get a response, because if they do not respond to anallergenic, they will not respond to hypoallergenic or ZD. While if they don't respond to ZD or hypoallergenic, a small percentage will still respond to anallergenic. So you might as well save yourself the time. If you're not getting a response to either of those, it's probably not a food allergy, but you can still benefit from skin support type diets, skin topic, and that class of nutritional support, but not truly hypoallergenic foods. On the other hand, if you want to do a novel protein diet, we have more options. Personally, I use a lot of Prime100, which was originally an Australian brand, so it's quite local and I'm quite familiar with it and I quite like it. You do want the single protein diet range, because the less ingredients you have in a food, the less likely you are to have the one you're allergic to. Across the board, novel protein diets are probably about 70-ish% effective at diagnosing the food allergies. There is a fair amount of guesswork and you have to get the right one. I should note that if you're talking about a pet with inflammatory bowel disease, that's a whole different game. Similar principle, but different statistics. With the Prime100, you have several options, but you want to pick a protein that your pet has not eaten before. So if you feed it lots of kangaroo because you're in Australia, the kangaroo diet is not a great choice for a novel protein diet. The fish one might be, or if you're really stuck, there is the crocodile diet. Now, fun fact about the crocodile diet was that originally you could buy it just in pet stores. But this led to lots of people, mostly little old ladies in my experience, getting the crocodile diet for their dog just for a treat every now and then, which means that if their pet had a food allergy, I could not use crocodile as a novel protein because it had already been eating it on a regular basis. So now the crocodile one is harder to get and you mostly need to get it through a vet clinic or with a vet note. Because if you feed it casually, it's no longer a novel protein. If you are somewhere where you don't have lots of commercial options available, you can consider home cooking your food allergy diet as a trial. You should talk to your own vet about what's appropriate for your pet, but as a really rough guide, dogs need about 1/3 meat, 2/3 carb, and cats need about 50-50 carbs to meat as your base. And then you'll need to add something for the different vitamins, minerals, salt, and oil that your pet needs, depending on other comorbidities and nutritional factors. So if you are somewhere where you want to feed a reindeer diet as a trial because it's readily available to you, that's where you start. Whatever you choose, you need to be prepared to feed that diet for, ideally, 12 weeks as the only thing that your pet eats, because it takes that long for the immune system to calm down. We're also trying to grow out a couple of layers of skin to really see a difference. If your pet has a snack partway through, if it eats something it's not supposed to, you are back to day 0 and you need to do the 12 weeks again. One of the most common mistakes I see with people doing a food trial is they will buy a great big expensive bag of anallergenic and they will feed that to their dog or cat, but they will also feed chicken as a treat and go, well, it's not working. Possibly because if it's allergic to chicken, the hypoallergenic diet is not magic. It's an exclusion diet. It works because your pet is eating nothing but hypoallergenic food. If you are giving it any sort of treats, or if it's a Labrador and it's eating somebody else's poop, the diets won't work. Now, this is not a sponsored video by Prime. They just happen to have solved a lot of problems for me, and I've had very small debates with the rep who managed to answer all my questions quite well. But as a fun fact, there's not really much in the way of gluten in their ingredients. So I don't think you can call them gluten-free the same way that you would call a human food gluten-free, and there's no certification for pet food. But to my knowledge, they don't actually bring anything wheat or wheat containing into the factory. So for those allergy diets, the single protein diets, that's probably pretty close to a true gluten-free pet food. Now, in Australia, we have not seen cases of the diet-associated cardiomyopathy, which is a huge blessing, at least to my knowledge. I'll double check that in a couple of weeks. But if you're a celiac, if you are the sort of person who will get sick from 2 molecules of gluten, and you have a dog who likes to sleep in your bed, lick your face, or lick themselves, and is eating gluten, and you would not like them to do that, the Prime100 might actually be a good option, because you share space with that dog. If you're very exquisitely sensitive, maybe you want to remove gluten from its diet as well. Or if you just don't like the idea of feeding grain to your dog, I've had no problems at all with Prime100. So to clarify, Prime got back to me 2 days before I was planning to publish this video to confirm that yes, everything they produce is basically gluten-free. There is no wheat or wheat products that they bring into the factory. So while it doesn't have a certification like human food, it is effectively gluten-free. Thank you, Pancake. The only grains they use is rice in the clearly labelled chicken and rice formula, but everything else is either pumpkin or tapioca or quinoa, basically tubers or seeds rather than grains. So now you've picked a diet for your pet. How do you actually go about diagnosing a food allergy? And then how do you find hopefully a cheaper diet that you can actually feed them sustainably long term? Well, ideally, you get the diet like an allergenic, or if that's not an option, your chosen novel protein that you're pretty confident your pet is not currently reacting to. And you feed that exclusively, just that diet and water, for 12 continuous weeks. If the allergy symptoms go away, brilliant. Looks like you've got a food allergy. but you don't know what they are allergic to. From here, you have two options. Option one is that you feed them the old food that you think they were allergic to, and if the symptoms come back, you found an allergy. Remove it from their life. Option two is that you take one ingredient at a time and you test feed. So if your, say, dog has been brilliant on anallergenic for 12 weeks, you might decide, well, I want to feed him carrots because he liked carrots. So for 2 weeks, you can feed him a bit of carrot every day in addition to the anallergenic. If there's no symptoms, great, carrots are safe. Let's keep doing that. After 2 weeks, you choose one more ingredient and you add that into his diet. And you add a new ingredient every 2 weeks until you either find the culprit or you've found what you want to feed him long term. I hope this video has been helpful for you. Nutrition is complicated, allergies are complicated, but I've tried to make it as understandable as I can. If you have more suggestions for nutrition topics you'd like me to make a video, please feel free to drop them into the comments below, because I do intend to continue with this series. Or if there's anything else you'd like to talk about, feel free to offer suggestions. I would like to thank my Ko-fi supporters who get access to videos only and get priority with their questions and sneak peeks and little things like that. But thank you all so much for watching. My name is Dr. Ferox, and I hope to see you next time. This is Dingus. Bye.